Welcome back, YouTube, to another episode of 10 with Travis, where we take just 10 minutes a day to dive deep into the Word so you can be more equipped today than you were yesterday. Today, we're going to talk about kind of the remaining second half of the book of Exodus. We're going to go through maybe 3 or 4 different Did You Knows, kind of in a popcorn style, just as I finished reading the book of Exodus, just kind of some things that stood out to me. So, last episode, we talked about manna and how God used that as a trusting tool for the Israelites to continue to be able to actually not really continue, but to start trusting God. Because again, that was kind of the lifting off point of their trust is they now went from having food, shelter, all that type of stuff in Egypt to now they had kind of nothing. They had to do it on their own and they had to trust that God was going to be able to help them and provide them during that time. So we're going to jump in today and also see kind of some subtle ways where God is using different little things to continue to allow trust to be built so faith can arise. And that's something that he does in our lives too. As we go through trials and tribulations, we use those later in life to draw on and pull on when we're believing for something bigger than what we believed for in the past. We can use the same faith that brought us that, healed our stub toe that can heal us of cancer. So it's the same faith, but we have to work that muscle and we have to renew our minds as we do that as well. So in chapter 17, we see 2 sections that talk about Moses' staff. In the first instance, it's used to bring provision, and that specific provision in this instance is water. So verses 5 through 6 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on a rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So again, the obvious thing here is that Moses did a great miracle with the staff, right? He did that miracle, God provided for him. But again, the subtlety is God just used another thing to continue to build their faith. Again, he's using sometimes these things that are uncommon to us too, like striking a rock and letting water come out of it. So he knows that the Israelites have to have a pretty big level of faith for them to take over the promised land. So he's using some pretty strong early on trusting tools that he's going to use to get them to continue to build their faith up. So we see in verses 11 through 13, another instance where the staff is used. So it said, whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hand grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on each side, and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with a sword. So in this instance, the staff was used for protection and victory. So as he raised up the staff, the Israelites would win, but if he lowered it, then the Amalekites would go ahead and take, advantage and take control of the battle. So there's kind of more to that in, pictures and what that means. But again, for right now, he's using the staff as another trusting tool that the Israelites can continue to build their faith on. So we're going to touch on, like I said, 3 more, and we're kind of just going to go through them quickly here. But if some of these spark your interest, go ahead and go back and look at the context and kind of see what was going on for these. But these are kind of 3 as I finished out the book that, again, not even trying to draw opinions or conclusions on them, but more so just something that stood out to me and kind of made me continue to think or ponder about some of these things and even pray about God on what I may believe these things mean in my own life. So in Exodus 23, God is talking to the Israelites about how he would drive out certain people from the land for them. However, verse 29 and 30 really stood out to me, and this is what it says. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little I will drive them out before you until you have increased and possess the land. So God had the enemies stay in the land for a certain time because it said that it would ruin the land. If not, there would be beasts that come up and they would never be able to go into that land. So they had to wait until they increased enough to possess the land. So when I thought about that, I want to pose some of these questions to you and see what you kind of think. Does God do this with us? Do we maybe stay in our circumstances until we have increased enough in maybe a certain revelation that can bring us out to it to enjoy what he has for us? Would him giving us the desire of our heart too early actually destroy us? So again, these are just questions that I kind of had, and I would like you to ponder them as well. If you have any comments or answers to those questions, definitely drop those below. The next one comes in Exodus 22:24, which again is actually a chapter before what we just talked about in Exodus 23, but it gives some parameters on borrowing and lending. So again, that's a big part of our society, and I won't get into too much on my stance or how I feel about some of those things. So if you are interested in that, please go ahead and reach out to me. But this is what I read in Exodus and thought it was very interesting. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. So basically, what I kind of got from this is if you're a Christian, again, that's talking to the Israelites, but, we're not necessarily Israelites now, but these things can be applicable to us, which does pose, another question. Some things were only applicable to that specific people, so you have to take that in context. But if you're a Christian and you lend to another Christian, you really shouldn't maybe take or charge any interest. Because when you do that, it's kind of coming out of a selfish, greedy place that I'm doing this, I'm helping this Christian out because they're going to give me 10% in return. Whereas a selfless, just generous heart would say, hey, I have extra money. I'm going to go ahead and lend it to them, and they just have to pay me back. They don't have to pay back with interest. I don't gain anything from this, but the only thing I gain is knowing that I helped a brother or sister in Christ. So that's something that really popped in my brain just because we have so much borrowing and lending in our society now, and no one really takes that stance on it. So that really was interesting to me. So if you are in that space, again, I'm not really giving you any advice on that, but if you want to reach out, we can talk about that. But go ahead and pray to God and see what you think on that particular one. So our last did you know comes from Exodus 31. And here's what it says in verse 17, and this is God talking about the Sabbath. And I mentioned this in the previous episode that we would briefly talk about the Sabbath in this episode. So it says, "It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed." So a lot of times you see that verse and you think of the beginning part, right? That he created it in 6 days, he made heaven and earth, and the sign is that the Sabbath is holy. But what I took from it is it said that on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So the verbiage here is interesting to me because if it says he was refreshed, that means that at some point he was unrefreshed, which I don't know if that's a word, but you get my point. So during the 6 days of work for God, at some point it came a point where it was real work and he needed to be refreshed. So he took that time on the seventh day to be refreshed because it says he rested and was refreshed. If he was already refreshed, he wouldn't need to be refreshed. Now, again, I know God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-everything. But the fact that he needed to be refreshed, or he thought it was vital for him to take a refreshing time away, how much more so for us? If the God of the universe needs to do that, I think we definitely need to do that in our lives. We need to set aside that time to rest and be refreshed. So that does it for today. If this episode has blessed you or this channel has blessed you and you'd like to give financially to the network, please see the ways below. We would love to have some financial support as we continue to grow our ministry. We try to reach more places, try to visit some churches and do some things like that. If you have questions or comments, please see below on how to email us or drop that below here on YouTube. I thank you and appreciate everyone that watched today, and we will see you next time on 10 with Travis.